All right. Now that we all are all masters of this, if you've been following along, yours should look like this now. Okay, very good. So we've got our form. We've got something handling the events. All it's doing is console logging some stuff. We want to actually add it to a list on the page, right? We did this yesterday. We can do it. Now, be careful. This is a tricky part. So make sure you very carefully trim around the left nostril so that it droops down over the background image, right? The earlobes are easy. That nostril, though, that's key. That's what really completes it. We were discussing before the afternoon. I wonder if they think I'm funny or a lunatic. I kind of don't care which it is. So let's add it to an unordered list. And yeah, don't answer that. So last time, the way we ended up writing render list item, we just passed it in an object, right? And it built the list items. Piece of cake. This time we don't need a separate list for each thing that we add. Before we were actually adding separate lists for each user, each with its own LIs. This time it's just a new LI for each flick. So it's a little simpler in that regard. So back on the HTML, we need a place to stick this thing. So let's just put the UL right here. We don't need to build the list in JavaScript. We'll just put the UL here. I'll give it an ID of flicks. Or flick list. Flick list. Name it the same thing we named it this morning. So then we'll need to grab that and add things to it each time, right? So it'd be nice if we did this the same way that we grabbed the form and actually passed the selector in from the outside. At least I think that would be nice. So here's what I have in mind. We could pass a second argument to init for the selector for grabbing the list. Or instead of that, so that we can keep them straight, we could just pass in an object and have a key form selector, and then I think it was flick form. Was it flick form? Yeah. And list selector. ID flick list. It just feels better to me somehow if we don't need to know those selectors inside app. They're just passed in. So now the argument being passed into init is not just a string, right? It's an object. So instead of form selector here, we have selectors. Instead of saying document query selector form selector, it would be selectors dot form selector. And then the idea is we'll keep track of the UL that we're appending them to. How about doing it the same way that we did this? We just make it another property on the object so that we can get to it. So again, we could say something like list colon and then do it here. Or we could just keep doing it the way we're doing it and say this.list equals document.query selector. Selectors dot list selector. Let's check that much, make sure I actually did that right. Refresh. Now I should, slow network detected. We know. This dot, not this, right? How do I get to that? I want to check what the list is. I can say app.list, right? Yeah, that worked. What is this out here, outside of the object? Anybody know? It's window, the global object. So window is what is the value of this when you invoke a function just like a regular function, when it's not a method, when it's not an event handler, when you just call any old method inside that, when you call any old function inside that function, this will always be bound to this global object, which is completely useless. Not that the global object is useless, but that binding is surely useless. So that's another one of the things that arrow functions fix. There are a lot of circumstances under which you might accidentally write a function that has this bound to window. So if you're using arrow functions all the time, you're going to avoid those. All right, so now we've got a list. What do we want to do with it? We want to append things to it. So it's time to build our render list item method. The order in which you define methods does not matter. This is all just one big function declaration, or one big object assignment. So they're all going to get created at the same time. It doesn't matter which order you put them in the source. So just put them in the order that you think it makes the most sense. I'm going to put render list up here. Since it does get called from handle submit, it still kind of just makes sense if it's higher up, but it doesn't actually impact whether it works. So I'm going to say render list item. It's going to be very similar to before. So render list item is just another property that happens to point to a function. Don't forget your comma. Putting it in the middle like this, you have to put the comma or it will break. We're going to create the list item. We're going to throw some text content in there, and we're going to return it. Const item equals document dot create element li. We said we were going to pass in the flick, right? So we'll get a flick here. Item.text content equals flick.name. And don't forget to return the item. Make sure it works before we copy too much. Refresh the page. This dot render list, it just expects some object with a name property, right? So whoops, this dot render list is not a function. What did I mean? This works from inside the object, but I'm not inside the object. I'm in the console. So it's not this. It's app, right? That whole object is assigned to the variable app. Whoops. App.renderList is not a function either. RenderList item, however, that's more like it. There we go. RenderList item. So now instead of just console logging this, we'll call RenderList item and do what with it? Append it to the list, right? I'll go ahead and do this in two separate lines. Const item equals RenderList item, passing in the flick. Then what do I append it to? What do I append it to? Yeah, check. This dot list. Yeah. This dot list is the list that we grabbed off the page. This dot list dot append child item ought to do it. Refresh the page. Step up. Oh, shucks. Render list item is not defined. Don't panic. Line 27. Render list item is not defined. Line 27. Render list item. Not defined. What happened? Right. This dot render list item. You'll do the same thing at some point. I'm pretty sure I did the same thing this morning. Try that again. Magic Mike. There we go. So it sticks it on the end of the list. I think I meant to put this inside main. Let's put this inside main after the form, because I've got a background color on there. There we go. Beautiful. Questions about that? All right, add the flick to an unordered list.